we're going to move right into Alex's presentation. He's got some great stories to share as well. So Alex, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. My name is Alexander Dale. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Engineers for a Sustainable World. And we do a bunch of different things. I'll talk about that in a second. So let me get this. So a little bit about me. I am, if we're going with LinkedIn labels, a non-traditional STEM graduate. I recently finished up my PhD in civil and environmental from Pitt. My background is in energy and water policy, but all of our research methods from our research group focus on LCA. So I have a very good background in the expert level side of LCA. Simultaneously with doing my PhD, I've been involved with Engineers for a Sustainable World at the national level, helping to drive some of the strategic planning and some of the educational efforts. And as my first postgraduate position then, I've stepped into the executive director role. The organization's been around since about 2002, and we're driving it in a new direction, which is really nice. And it helps me fulfill kind of the social obligations that I see as engineers. And as to why sustainability, I see sustainability as a gigantic, complex, and very discussable issue, and that just fascinates me. So ESW is a national organization, international organization. We have 34 chapters at different universities and a bunch of growing professional chapters. We've been around since 2002. The focus of these chapters is on technical sustainability projects, whether that's on campus, whether that's in local communities, and some of that is with international work. That's how do we make these places better, how do we give students a chance to do some service learning, do some design, implement something. And then nationally, we work on connecting those chapters into a national community and also doing some education. And the last few years, we've really been expanding those educational efforts. To get beyond the sets of projects, we've expanded to some webinar offerings to include some skills-focused webinars. And some of that has been leadership skills, how to do project management. But also we want to do some sustainable design skills so that ESW alums are more prepared for the workforce. They've been exposed to tools that they're going to use, even if they don't have classes on them. We're aiming to expose students to ideas, regardless of their school, and not necessarily to replace courses just yet. But webinars have a limited depth. So we met Sustainable Minds at a conference last year. We realized that it would be a really great partnership opportunity to use Sustainable Minds to offer a deeper life cycle assessment experience to our chapters and members. And what we came up with is the LCA+U challenge. And this goes to the idea that there are a lot of contests and opportunities out there for students to suggest improvements to their campuses. But very rarely do those improvements have any sense of, is this actually better attached to them? So we requested proposals from our chapters. We said, okay, find some system, some service, some project that you're working on around campus. Tell us about it. Tell us how you could use LCA to make it better. Show us that you have contact with campus staff. We want this to be something that can be real. We'll give you access to the software, and we'll look for some final presentations. We'll provide some mentoring along the way. Students were doing this as an extracurricular project, so our timeline is maybe a little bit longer than the other two presentations here. But they were doing it outside of class. This is a bonus activity, and timing-wise, they could have used even a little bit more time. So first year overview, we've just finished the first round. We had signed up to 34 chapters. We got 6 projects that got to fruition from 3 different major categories, 2 looking at specific material options, 1 on wipes for gymnasia and 1 on takeout containers, which I'll talk a little bit more about. 2 looking at buildings on campus that are going to be renovated. How do we make those buildings more energy efficient, lower impact? And 2 looking at existing design projects within the chapter and which materials do we pick. So students were provided with access to the software as well as some mentoring support from ESW as well as some time from Sustainable Minds. As I mentioned, some of us on the ESP National Scheme have some solid experience with life cycle assessment as well, so we can provide some of that mentoring support. These are the 5 schools that we got proposals from and we're working with. So I want to talk about 2 projects in particular. One from Ohio State, which looks at energy and water consumption for this gigantic engineering laboratory building. And this was an example of meshing some of the on-campus service learning and LCA as well as working with the facilities department. And then one from RIT, which looked at takeout containers, which is what material do we use, what system do we use for takeout containers. And that's a little bit more of a classic LCA problem. Both of these have produced some really nice results and should have some nice impacts on campus as well. So Ohio State started out with this very large building, and they said, okay, it consumes a lot of energy and a lot of water. It's an older building. How do we make that better? And we talked with them a lot, and this ended up being a learning opportunity to talk about scoping. But there just wasn't a good scope for them to talk about the whole building at once. And so they ended up looking at just water usage, that they're pumping a lot of water around the building, so if they could decrease that, that would save a bunch of energy. And then they have a large roof, so if we can capture water off that roof and use it instead, that will also save some energy. And they ended up with a very specific project looking at different types of piping, different types of tank materials, different sizes of tanks. And they have a best option, and they've been working with their facilities department now to find some grant money to build a pilot project to implement the system and see how well it will work. And some key learnings here that focusing on a piece of the problem is key, and that even though this was indirect energy savings, they're still looking at about $100,000 a year in lower energy costs. The other team is from RIT, and they have 17 different dining areas on campus. And so but all of them use different takeout containers. That ranges from tinfoil over a plate to biomaterials to standard plastic containers. And this dining service is interested in standardizing that. And the team said, okay, so let's look at these materials, figure out how we use them, figure out a better option. They also surveyed some of the existing materials around campus, and they also identified a new option that would be a collected and reused container. And there's a picture of the team there. The results, and shown here on the right, is some of the bill of materials for the newer PLA-lined gas clamshell that they invented. They were looking at, how do we standardize this? They did look at all the different phases, including a bunch of end-of-life material. They figured out that about 2/3 of them are landfilled, but the rest can be composted or recycled, and are. The results show that the reusable option was the lowest impact, and that unlike some of Eric's results, the transportation was actually surprisingly important for a lot of materials. Dining Services is now reviewing a lot of these results with an eye to making some informed decisions. The team would like me to note that these results are not necessarily applicable to a lot of different campuses without some extra work. ESP National, we're going to work on helping to translate those results to other places. This is a question that we see at a lot of campuses. And some key learnings here that different products can have very different hotspots, but that even with uncertainty, there can sometimes be a clear winner, which is a little bit rare in LCA. But they did an example looking at the reusable and recycled material, where even with a large amount of energy used for washing it, it was still better than the other options that they had available. So key learnings here, that for students that learned that system definition is really critical to good or any results, that life cycle assessment, this is a deeper exposure to it. It can be a really useful piece of a broader project or analysis, particularly once you have a good definition and a good idea of what you're trying to look at. And finally, that some projects don't make sense from an environmental impacts perspective. We had a team looking at putting solar panels on a school bus stop that was already part of the grid, and it just didn't make sense in terms of putting the new panels in, putting in new materials. From an educator's point of view, and from our point of view as a nonprofit, Sustainable Minds was a really good tool for in-depth exploration of what we consider to be a really key design skill. The cloud-based approach fits really well with our network of chapters. It's easy to get other people on, even if they're across the country. And with some tuning on dates and example, we really look forward to repeating this challenge with Sustainable Minds. And maybe if there are educators out there, maybe some of your students would join us as ESW members. Finally, I want to close with a trend slide here that the future is in networks, and that sounds a little bit cliche, but there's some deeper meaning there. First, that Sustainable Minds is network-based software. It allows a lot more people to work with LCA data. You can use it anywhere, as Eric pointed out, and Wendy showed with online pieces. And then pairing that, ESW is a network of sustainability-minded individuals. We have a lot of technical folks. And then using programs like LCA+U, we can provide guidance on real applications of LCA regardless of where students are in different programs, different years. And I'd like to note that pairing these networks, which are external to academia, and then supporting both of them, pairing those with traditional educational institutions or non-traditional ones can allow a lot more people, not just those at some of the best schools that are very interested in pursuing these, to learn some of this life cycle thinking and be better designers for a better world. And that's our interest, is let's make better people regardless of where they go to school, regardless of some of their background. So with that, I will close, and I thank you.